January 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Base, territory of Hawaii. The sun climbs slow over the scarred harbor, casting long shadows across twisted metal and oil-slicked water. 2 months have passed since the surprise attack that shattered the Pacific Fleet, yet the taste of smoke still lingers in the morning air. Across the naval yards, men move with the weight of December 7th pressed into their shoulders. Welders spark against wounded hulls. Engineers calculate tonnage and time, and somewhere in the distance a bugle calls out reveille over graves still fresh with earth. Among the warships that survived that Sunday morning, one stands apart. The USS Enterprise, hull number CV-6, rides at anchor with a peculiar distinction. She was not there when the bombs fell. Fate, or perhaps divine scheduling, had placed her 200 miles at sea, delivering Marine fighters to Wake Island, while her sister ships, Arizona, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, became tombs. The men who serve aboard her understand what this means. They are the inheritors of borrowed time, sailors and airmen walking decks that should, by all rights, share the same fate as their comrades beneath the harbor's surface. But borrowed time, history would soon demonstrate, demands payment. The carrier represents more than floating steel and aircraft. She is 25,000 tons of American industrial might, a city unto herself, with a crew of 2,000 souls, carrying within her hangar bays the sharp edge of a nation's vengeance. Her flight deck stretches 809 feet, a length that seems infinite when racing toward takeoff, impossibly short when landing. Below decks, in spaces thick with the smell of aviation fuel and hot metal, machinists and ordnancemen work in organized chaos, preparing aircraft for missions that will carry them deep into Japanese-controlled waters. These men do not consider themselves heroes. They are technicians, mechanics, specialists in the machinery of war. They enlisted to serve, to work with their hands, to keep the complex mechanisms of naval aviation functioning under impossible conditions. Most had never heard a shot fired in anger before December. Most had never seen a man die. February 1942 would teach them otherwise. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, America's strategic position in the Pacific exists in a state of controlled collapse. The Japanese offensive rolls forward with terrible momentum. Wake Island fallen, Guam occupied, the Philippines under siege. Admiral Chester Nimitz, newly appointed commander of the Pacific Fleet, possesses exactly 3 operational aircraft carriers to contest an ocean. The Enterprise, the Lexington, the Saratoga, limping toward repairs after a torpedo strike. Against them, the Imperial Japanese Navy deploys 6 fleet carriers, backed by the most experienced naval aviators in the world, men who cut their teeth over China, who perfected their craft in the crucible of actual combat. The mathematics are brutal. American planners know they cannot afford to lose a single carrier. Each one represents irreplaceable capability, months of construction time, thousands of trained personnel. Yet carriers exist to strike, not to hide. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Enterprise Task Force, understands this paradox intimately. His solution? Aggressive action. Hit-and-run raids against Japanese-held islands. Keep the enemy off balance. Make them believe the Pacific Fleet still possesses offensive capability, even as it bleeds from a dozen wounds. On February 1st, the Enterprise turns her bow southwest, bound for the Marshall Islands. Intelligence reports suggest Japanese bases at Kwajalein, Woje, and Maloelap. perfect targets for the kind of swift carrier raid that might restore a measure of American pride. The task force moves in radio silence, maintaining strict light discipline after dark. Sailors stand watch with the knowledge that somewhere in the vast Pacific, Japanese submarines prowl the shipping lanes, searching for exactly this kind of prize. Below decks, in the cramped machinery spaces and workshops that form the carrier's hidden anatomy, men like aviation machinists mate third class Bruno Peter Guido continue their work. Guido, 22 years old, hails from Milwaukee, the son of Italian immigrants, a young man shaped by the Depression's harsh arithmetic. He joined the Navy seeking steady employment, 3 meals a day, a future beyond factory floors and unemployment lines. The service gave him training in aircraft engines, taught him to coax performance from radial cylinders and carburetors, to diagnose mechanical failures by sound and vibration alone. His station is the hangar deck, that enormous enclosed space where aircraft are maintained, repaired, and prepared for flight. It smells of hydraulic fluid and dope-tightened fabric, of hot oil and the peculiar chemical sharpness of aviation gasoline. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers and Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo planes fill the space, their wings folded to maximize storage, their engines cold and silent. Guido knows these machines intimately, their temperaments, their weaknesses, the specific sounds they make when something is wrong. He does not know that within days his understanding of duty will expand beyond maintenance schedules and torque specifications. February 20th. Dawn breaks over the Marshall Islands with the kind of tropical clarity that makes distances deceptive. The Enterprise steams into position 35 miles north of WWII, her escorts spread in defensive formation around her, destroyers and cruisers scanning the horizon for threats. On the flight deck, the organized chaos of launch operations unfolds with practiced precision. Yellow-shirted aircraft handlers push planes into position. Blue-shirted plane pushers muscle the heavy machines across the deck. Ordnance men in red load bombs and ammunition. The air boss coordinates movement from his station overlooking the deck, speaking into a handset with calm authority. Engines cough to life, propellers spin, and one by one the strike aircraft roar down the deck and claw into the morning sky. The first wave departs clean. 18 dive bombers target Japanese installations at WWII. The pilots are young, most with fewer than 20 carrier landings in their logbooks. They fly knowing the Japanese will be ready, that anti-aircraft fire will greet them over the target, that some of them may not return. This is the nature of carrier warfare, an arithmetic of loss, a calculus that trades aircraft and lives for strategic effect. Bruno Guido watches them go from his station below. The hangar deck trembles with each takeoff, the carrier's structure transmitting the shock of launched aircraft through steel beams and riveted plates. He returns to his work, wrench in hand, adjusting a temperamental cylinder on a reserve aircraft's engine. The morning passes in the rhythm of maintenance, inspection, adjustment, testing, normal routine in abnormal times. Then, at 13:15 hours, the alarm klaxon shatters the routine. Air raid! Air raid! All hands to battle stations! The announcement comes fast, clipped, urgent. Throughout the ship, men sprint to their positions. Gun crews race to anti-aircraft mounts. Damage control parties don helmets and life vests. The Enterprise begins to turn, seeking position to bring maximum firepower to bear on an approaching threat. On the hangar deck, Guido's mind processes the situation with mechanical clarity. Japanese bombers coming for the carrier. He knows what this means. He studied the Pearl Harbor attack reports, read the damage assessments, understood what happens when bombs find an aircraft deck's flight deck. Fire, explosion, steel transformed into shrapnel, men transformed into casualties. The first enemy aircraft appears as a speck against the high cirrus clouds, then another and another. Mitsubishi G4M bombers, Bettys in the nomenclature American pilots are just beginning to develop. Twin-engined medium bombers, each carrying a payload sufficient to cripple a carrier if the aim proves true. They approach in a shallow glide, their pilots seeking the perfect angle, the perfect moment to release their weapons. The Enterprise's anti-aircraft guns open fire. 5-inch mounts roar, filling the sky with proximity-fused shells. 40mm Bofors guns hammer out measured bursts. 20mm Ehrlichen cannons add their higher-pitched chatter to the symphony of defense. The sky around the carrier fills with black puffs of explosive smoke, a deadly garden of flak blooming in 3 dimensions. One bomber flames and falls, trailing smoke into the sea. Another breaks away, damaged, streaming fuel. But the rest press their attack with the kind of determination that will characterize Japanese aerial assault throughout the war. They have trained for this. They have imagined this moment. The American carrier in their sights, the chance to strike a blow that might shift the Pacific balance. Guido stands on the hangar deck, useless. His station offers no weapons, no way to contribute to the ship's defense. He can only listen to the thunder of guns above, feel the carrier heeling through hard turns, and wait. Then he hears it, the scream of an aircraft engine growing louder. Too loud, wrong pitch, wrong direction. A Japanese bomber, damaged by anti-aircraft fire, has lost altitude and control. Its pilot, dying or dead, no longer guides the machine. It comes down in a flat glide, trailing smoke, heading directly for the Enterprise's stern. The aircraft hits the edge of the flight deck with a grinding shriek of tortured metal. It does not explode, not immediately. Instead, it skids forward, shedding parts, its momentum carrying it across the deck in a shower of sparks. The impact throws the bomber's rear gunner free. He tumbles across the wooden planking, uniform burning, body broken. But he is alive, and he is armed. The Japanese gunner, disoriented and in shock, does what his training demands. He reaches for his weapon, a pistol, standard issue for aircrew. His hands close on the grip, even as American sailors rush toward him. Above, on the flight deck, chaos. Fire crews scramble to contain burning aviation fuel. The wrecked bomber sits smoking, a bomb still lodged in its belly, unexploded, unstable, capable of detonating at any moment. Deck crews work with desperate speed to push the wreckage overboard before the fire reaches the ordnance. But the Japanese gunner represents a different kind of threat. He rises to one knee, pistol coming up, seeking targets among the men around him. His training tells him to fight, to cause damage, to die with honor serving the emperor. The Americans see a wounded enemy combsman preparing to kill. The moment stretches, compressed by adrenaline and fear, each man processing threat and response. Then a sailor tackles the gunner from behind. They struggle. The pistol discharges, a flat crack nearly lost in the larger cacophony of damage control efforts. The bullet finds no target, disappearing into the Pacific sky. More sailors pile on, overwhelming the gunner through sheer numbers. He fights until consciousness leaves him, until blood loss and trauma shut down his body's ability to resist. Below, on the hangar deck, Bruno Guido hears the commotion above. He knows the ship has been hit. He knows men are fighting fires, pushing wreckage, doing the desperate work of damage control. He knows his station is below, away from the action, maintaining his place in the ship's order. He also knows that sometimes orders and duty diverge. The hangar deck opens to the flight deck through enormous elevators designed to lift aircraft between levels. These elevators, when raised, leave rectangular openings in the flight deck, gaps through which a man can see sky or through which a man can climb. Standard procedure keeps these openings closed during battle stations, sealed to prevent fire and damage from spreading between decks. But in the confusion following the Japanese bomber's crash, one elevator remains partially raised. Gaido makes his decision in the space between heartbeats. He does not request permission. He does not inform his superior. He simply moves, racing across the hangar deck toward the open elevator shaft. His hands find the steel edges. His boots find purchase on the elevator mechanism's framework. He climbs. Physical courage comes in many forms. There is the courage of soldiers advancing under fire, the courage of pilots flying into flak, the courage of commanders making decisions that will cost lives. And there is this, the courage of a machinist's mate, untrained in combat, choosing to leave his station and climb toward danger because some internal compass demands it. Gaido pulls himself onto the flight deck into a scene from hell's own workshop. The wrecked bomber lies 30 yards away, flames licking along its fuselage, smoke pouring from ruptured fuel tanks. Firefighting crews spray foam and water, their efforts barely containing the blaze. The unexploded bomb in the aircraft's belly makes every second a negotiation with fate. Around the wreckage, sailors work to rig cables, preparing to push the entire burning mass over the side before it explodes and kills them all. But Gaido's attention fixes on something else. Another aircraft, parked 20 feet from the burning bomber. An SBD Dauntless dive bomber, fully fueled, its bomb bay loaded with ordnance. The heat from the fire is already blistering its paint, warping its aluminum skin. If the flames reach this aircraft, its fuel tanks will ignite. If that happens, the resulting explosion will turn the Enterprise's flight deck into a killing field. The dive bomber sits empty. Its engine is cold. Under normal circumstances, starting an aircraft engine requires careful procedure, primer, magnetos, throttle settings, a steady hand on the starter. Under normal circumstances, it takes time. Bruno Gaido does not have time. He runs across the deck, weaving between firefighters and damage control parties. Men shout at him, warnings, questions, orders he cannot hear over the roar of flames and the hammer of his own pulse in his ears. He reaches the Dauntless and vaults into the cockpit without breaking stride. The seat is still warm from morning sun. The instruments are dark and dead. The control stick sits neutral between his knees. Gaido's hands move across the cockpit with trained efficiency, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would be too slow. Master switch on, fuel valve open, mixture rich, throttle cracked. His left hand finds the primer pump and strokes it, forcing fuel into the engine's cylinders. The Japanese bomber's fire intensifies. Black smoke rolls across the deck, obscuring vision, filling lungs with toxic chemicals. The heat is tremendous now, shimmering the air, making breath painful. The bomb in the burning wreckage could explode at any second, could have exploded already in some parallel timeline where fate judged differently. Gaido's right hand hits the starter. The engine coughs, dies. Again. This time it catches. The propeller spins, reluctant, then faster, then suddenly the radial engine roars to life with a bellow that cuts through the chaos. The Dauntless shudders, straining against its wheel chocks, the prop wash blasting back across the deck with hurricane force. And this is where Bruno Guido does something that will echo through naval aviation history, something so seemingly insane that witnesses will struggle to explain it even years later. He does not taxi the aircraft away from danger. He does not shut down the engine and flee. Instead, he advances the throttle to full power, aims the propeller directly at the burning Japanese bomber, and holds position. The physics are simple. The execution is anything but. The Dauntless's three-bladed propeller spins at 2,200 revolutions per minute, generating a focused column of air moving at hurricane velocity. Guido points this artificial windstorm at the fire, using the prop wash as a weapon against the flames. The effect is immediate and dramatic. The blast of air hits the burning bomber like a physical blow, pushing flames away from the Dauntless, disrupting the fire's ability to propagate. Burning fuel that was spreading toward the parked dive bomber is instead driven back, contained, its advance halted by the sheer force of air moving at speeds sufficient to knock a man off his feet. Guido holds the throttle forward, feeling the Dauntless shake with barely contained power, feeling the engine temperature gauges climb as he runs the motor at combat power without airspeed to cool it. The cockpit fills with smoke. His eyes stream tears from chemical irritation. The heat is intense enough to raise blisters on exposed skin, but he holds position, keeps the prop wash directed at the fire, buying seconds and yards for the damage control teams working to push the Japanese wreckage overboard. On the deck, sailors realize what the machinist's mate is doing. Understanding spreads through the damage control teams like electricity. They redouble their efforts, working in the tunnel of clearer air that Guido's desperate measure has created. Fire hoses are brought to bear with greater effect. Cables are secured to the bomber's landing gear. A bulldozer, one of the small tractors used to move aircraft, is brought up and positioned. 30 seconds. 45. The Dauntless's engine screams in protest, overheating, running beyond its operational limits. Guido can smell burning oil, can feel abnormal vibrations through the control stick. He knows he is destroying the engine. He knows the aircraft may never fly again after this. He does not care. 1 minute. The deck crews heave on cables, the bulldozer pushes, and with agonizing slowness, the burning Japanese bomber begins to move toward the deck edge. The explosion everyone fears does not come. Perhaps the bomb's fusing was damaged in the crash. Perhaps divine intervention stayed its detonation. Perhaps simple luck, that most capricious of combat companions, chose this moment to favor the Americans. Whatever the reason, the wreckage reaches the deck edge and tumbles over, falling into the Pacific in a cascade of burning debris and superheated steam. Guido pulls the throttle back to idle. The sudden quiet is shocking, though the deck remains anything but silent. He sits in the cockpit, hands trembling with adrenaline, watching smoke rise from the water where the Japanese bomber met its final end. The Dauntless's engine ticks and pings as it cools, probably ruined, but it served its purpose. Men surround the aircraft now, staring up at him. Some are shouting, some are laughing with the desperate relief of men who just escaped death. Some simply stare, trying to process what they witnessed. Bruno Guido climbs down from the cockpit on shaking legs. He expects arrest. He violated direct orders by leaving his station. He commandeered an aircraft without authorization. He ran an engine at destructive power settings without regard for equipment preservation. By the book, he could face court-martial. Instead, a lieutenant commander, the air boss, responsible for all flight deck operations, strides toward him. The officer's face is unreadable, a mask of command authority. He stops 3 feet from Guido, close enough that the machinist mate can see the soot stains on the officer's uniform, the exhaustion around his eyes. The air boss extends his hand. "Son," he says, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet section of deck, "that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I haven't decided which." Guido shakes the offered hand, unable to form words.
"But it worked," the air boss continues. "You saved that aircraft, probably saved a dozen men's lives, maybe saved the ship." He pauses, studying the young machinist's mate. "What made you think of it?" Guido finds his voice. It comes out rough, abraded by smoke. "Seemed like the thing to do, sir." Word of the incident spreads through the Enterprise with the speed that only shipboard gossip can achieve. By evening, every sailor aboard knows the story of the machinist's mate who jumped into a parked plane and used its prop wash to fight fire. The tale grows with each retelling, the flames higher, the danger greater, the moment more desperate. But the core truth remains. A young enlisted man made a split-second decision that saved lives and equipment. Admiral Halsey, when the report reaches him, demands to meet Guido personally. The encounter takes place in the Admiral's sea cabin, a small compartment where Halsey conducts his war between the larger strategic decisions made in the flag plot. Guido stands at attention, still wearing his smoke-stained dungarees, facing a man who will become a legend of naval warfare. Halsey looks him over with the appraising eye of a commander who understands that battles are won by individual acts of courage as much as strategic planning. "Guido," he says, "what you did was unauthorized, dangerous, and completely contrary to procedure." "Yes, sir," Guido responds, preparing for the consequences. "It was also," Halsey continues, "exactly what this Navy needs more of: initiative, courage, the willingness to act when action is required." The Admiral's weathered face creases into something approaching a smile. "I'm putting you in for a commendation, and I'm recommending you for flight training. We need men like you in the air, not just maintaining engines." The transformation is instantaneous. Bruno Guido, machinist's mate, becomes Bruno Guido, future naval aviator. The paperwork will take weeks to process, but the decision is made. A young man who joined the Navy to escape poverty, who sought nothing more than steady work and 3 meals, will become a pilot in the most dangerous branch of the most dangerous service, fighting the most dangerous war in history. The human mind seeks patterns. It craves narrative, demands that events follow cause and effect, insists that outcomes must reflect something: virtue, fate, justice. We want to believe that courage is rewarded, that bravery ensures survival, that the men who perform heroic acts will live to old age and tell their grandchildren about the day they stood in the fire and did not burn. History offers no such guarantees. Bruno Guido does complete flight training. He earns his wings, becomes a radio man gunner in a torpedo bomber squadron. He flies from the Enterprise in the battles that define 1942, the Marshalls, the Gilberts, the pivotal carrier confrontation at Midway, where the course of the Pacific War pivots on the actions of a few hundred naval aviators. On June 4, 1942, at the Battle of Midway, Guido flies as gunner in a TBD Devastator, part of Torpedo Squadron 6's desperate attack on the Japanese carrier fleet. The TBDs are obsolete, slow, vulnerable, flying coffins sent against modern fighters and intense anti-aircraft fire. Of the 14 torpedo bombers that attacked that morning, only 4 survived. Guido's aircraft is shot down. He and his pilot, Ensign Franco Flaherty, ditch in the ocean and are captured by the Japanese destroyer Makigumo. What happens next is known only through post-war testimony from Japanese sources. The destroyer's captain, facing orders not to take prisoners, makes a decision that places him outside the boundaries of human decency. On June 15, 1942, 10 days after their capture, Bruno Guido and Franco Flaherty are tied to weighted fuel cans and thrown into the Pacific Ocean. They drown slowly, conscious, struggling against the inevitable.
This is where the easy narrative collapses. This is where we confront the universe's fundamental indifference to our sense of justice. Bruno Guido performed an act of genuine heroism, the kind that saves lives and earns medals. He showed courage, initiative, selflessness, all the virtues military culture celebrates, and his reward was to die at 22 years old, murdered in violation of every law of war, his body never recovered, his grave the empty Pacific. We could end the story here with this injustice, with this waste. We could catalog it as another tragedy in a war full of tragedies, another young life extinguished before its potential could fully manifest. But to do so would be to miss the larger truth that Bruno Guido's life illuminates. The act of heroism itself is the point, not the reward, not the survival, not the recognition or the career it enabled. The moment when a young machinist's mate climbed onto a flight deck, engulfed in chaos, and chose to act, that moment exists independent of what came after. It cannot be diminished by his later death. It cannot be erased by injustice. In that moment, Bruno Guido demonstrated something essential about human nature at its finest. He showed that ordinary men, given no time to consider consequences, will sometimes choose courage over safety. He proved that the machinery of war, for all its industrial scale and strategic complexity, ultimately depends on individual human decisions made in fractions of seconds.
The Enterprise survived because of what he did. The men working near that burning bomber went home to their families because of what he did. The aircraft he saved probably flew again, probably dropped bombs on Japanese positions, probably contributed in some small way to the eventual Allied victory. These effects ripple forward through time, impossible to fully quantify, but undeniably real. After the war, the Navy names a destroyer escort in his honor, the USS Guido. It serves from 1944 to 1960, sailing under the name of the young machinist's mate who once saved a carrier by doing something no manual anticipated, no regulation prescribed, no training prepared him for. Veterans of the Enterprise remember the incident for decades. In reunions and memoirs, in oral histories and documentary interviews, they return to that February day when one of their own did something extraordinary. They struggled to explain it, to capture in words the specific quality of courage that Guido displayed. It was not the courage of men trained for combat, not the courage of Marines storming beaches or pilots flying into flak. It was something more fundamental. The courage of seeing a problem and solving it, regardless of rules or risks. This is what democracies produce when truly tested. Not perfect humans, not flawless warriors, but ordinary individuals capable of extraordinary decisions when circumstances demand them. The American system, for all its flaws and contradictions, builds men who can think independently, who can assess situations and act on their own initiative, who understand that rigid adherence to procedure sometimes matters less than results. The Japanese pilot who crashed his burning bomber onto the Enterprise was also brave. He flew his mission knowing the risks, pressed his attack despite anti-aircraft fire, and died in service to his nation. His courage cannot be questioned, but his system did not prepare him, did not allow him to deviate from prescribed procedure. When the situation changed, when the plan collapsed, his training offered no flexibility. Bruno Guido's training did not include use prop wash to fight fires. No manual covered commandeer aircraft during battle damage. But his system had taught him to think, to assess, to adapt. The American military culture, descended from a frontier tradition of individual initiative and democratic self-governance, produced men who could be trusted to make decisions without direct supervision. This distinction would prove decisive across 1,000 battles, in 100 theaters, throughout 6 years of global warfare.
It was the difference between soldiers who could adapt to fluid tactical situations and soldiers who could not, between commanders comfortable with subordinate initiative and commanders who demanded rigid obedience, between a military culture that rewarded problem-solving and one that punished deviation from prescribed methods. We remember Bruno Guido not because his heroism guaranteed his survival. It did not. We remember him not because his story has a satisfying resolution. It does not. We remember him because in one moment of crisis, on a carrier deck, shrouded in smoke and fear, he chose to be the kind of person who climbs toward danger rather than away from it. That choice is what separates civilization from barbarism. Not technology, not industrial capacity, not even military power. The willingness of individuals to sacrifice personal safety for collective benefit, this is the foundation upon which free societies rest. This is what distinguishes democracies from autocracies, what makes certain values worth defending with blood and treasure. The Pacific Ocean covers more than 60 million square miles. Somewhere in that vastness, in waters that have claimed countless sailors across countless wars, Bruno Guido rests. No marker identifies the location. No memorial stands over the site. The ocean keeps its secrets, patient and indifferent. But memory persists where physical monuments cannot. In the oral traditions of Navy veterans, in the historical records of the Enterprise's service, in the stories that sailors tell to illustrate what initiative and courage look like in practice. Here, Bruno Guido lives. And perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this is all any soldier can hope for, to be remembered not for how they died, but for how they acted when action mattered. To be known not by the injustice that ended their life, but by the courage that defined it. The sun sets over Pearl Harbor just as it rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The harbor is quiet now, the warships gone to other ports or broken for scrap. The sailors who fought this war mostly gone themselves. But the water remains, and the sky, and the memory of what men once did here when the world hung in balance. And somewhere, in the endless archive of human courage, a young machinist's mate climbs toward danger one more time, reaches for the throttle of a parked aircraft, and demonstrates that freedom's survival depends not on perfect men, but on ordinary humans capable of extraordinary choices when the moment demands them.
This is the inheritance. This is what survives when the battles end and the warriors fall silent. Not the machinery of war, not the strategies and tactics, but the knowledge that when tested, when pushed to the edge of survival, democratic societies produce men who will climb into burning aircraft and point propellers at danger because it needs to be done. Bruno Guido saved the USS Enterprise not because he was superhuman, but because he was human in the best sense, capable of courage, motivated by duty, willing to act without certainty of outcome. This combination, repeated across thousands of individual decisions in thousands of desperate moments, proved sufficient to defeat empires built on rigid ideology and unquestioning obedience. The lesson endures. Freedom survives not through abstract principles or lofty ideals, but through the accumulated actions of individuals who choose in critical moments to climb toward the fire rather than away from it. This is how democracies defend themselves. This is why, against all strategic logic and military odds, the United States Navy turned the Pacific tide. One decision, one man, one moment when courage met opportunity and changed the course of a battle, perhaps of a war, certainly of a ship and the 2,000 souls aboard her. The Enterprise sailed on. The ocean remembers.
And we, inheritors of that victory, carry forward the story of the machinist's mate who jumped into a parked plane and through that simple act of extraordinary courage demonstrated what it means to serve something larger than self.